On a windy evening in Houston, Danielle Price, a poised black woman in jeans and sneakers, was pulled over without reason. The officer, Carter, masked his racism with a fake excuse. Suspicious behavior. But Danielle knew better. This wasn't about law. It was about power. His eyes dripped contempt. Her calm only fueled his need to dominate. When she refused an unlawful search, he twisted her arm, handcuffed her, and humiliated her on the street. She said nothing, but the fire in her eyes said everything. Like and subscribe to hear how this injustice backfired in tomorrow's powerful story. On the cold bench inside the police cruiser, Danielle Price sat handcuffed, her wrists stinging, her breath steady despite the chaos swirling around her. Just 15 minutes ago, she had been a free woman, driving her black SUV through a quiet neighborhood in Houston. Now she was being paraded through the streets like a criminal. The man behind the wheel, Officer Brett Carter, glanced at her in the rearview mirror with a smirk that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with dominance. His kind of authority wasn't about protecting people. It was about humiliating those he deemed beneath him. And to Carter, Danielle was exactly that. Black, confident, and driving a vehicle he didn't believe she had the right to own. The truth was, Danielle was the newly appointed director of Texas State Law Enforcement. But today, she chose not to wear her title. No polished suit, no security detail, just denim, a t-shirt, and running shoes. She wanted to see how officers in her state truly behaved when they didn't know they were being watched. Now she had her answer. She wasn't sure what hurt more, her wrists or the fact that Carter didn't see a citizen when he looked at her. He saw a threat. He saw someone to crush under his boots. Carter hadn't even bothered to read her Miranda rights. He didn't ask the usual questions. He'd gone straight from suspicion to aggression, escalating the situation with a smug confidence that reeked of years of unchecked behavior. And now, with her locked in the back seat, he felt victorious, like he'd just taught a lesson to a woman who dared to challenge him. But Danielle wasn't ordinary. In the front passenger seat sat Officer David Foster, a rookie with just 2 years on the force. He watched the rearview mirror with a mix of unease and guilt. He had seen Carter abuse his badge before, but never this boldly. Foster's fingers fidgeted near his belt, and he turned to his partner. "Are you sure we need the cuffs?" he asked, voice low. Carter scoffed. "Don't be soft, kid. This is how you get respect. You let them run over you once, they'll never stop." Foster swallowed hard. Them. The word echoed in his mind. Them, as if Danielle wasn't a person, just a category. He turned back, catching Danielle's gaze through the divider. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were fierce, steady, like she'd been through storms worse than this one, and lived to tell about it. Danielle didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Carter pulled into the station lot, dragging her out of the vehicle without a shred of care. "Let's go, Queen of the Streets," he muttered under his breath, pushing her through the front doors. Several officers inside glanced up. Some raised eyebrows, others looked away. One, Lieutenant Carlos Hernandez, stepped forward. "Carter, what is this?" "She was acting suspicious," Carter said. "All business now. Resisted orders, obstructed me in the execution of my duties." Hernandez looked Danielle over, sensing something off. "Is that true?" he asked, turning to Foster. Foster hesitated. She asked questions. She refused an illegal search. That's all." Danielle stood still, expression unreadable. "Take her to holding," Carter barked, grabbing her arm again. But before the female officer could escort her, A new voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Stop!" The room went silent. From the back office walked a tall man in plain clothes, sharp jawline, silver hair, and a stare that made grown men shrink. Lieutenant Charles Evans, Internal Affairs. "What's going on here?" Carter stiffened. "She refused to comply with—" Evans raised a hand. "What's your name, ma'am?" Danielle slowly turned to face him. The moment had come. Danielle Price. The shift in the room was immediate. Gasps, whispers. Even Carter blinked in confusion. Evans stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You're Director Danielle Price?" Danielle nodded. "The very same." Foster's mouth fell open. Hernandez turned pale. Carter looked like someone had punched him in the gut. Evans didn't waste another second. "Take off her cuffs. Now." The female officer scrambled to comply, unlocking the metal restraints with trembling fingers. Danielle rubbed her wrists, her composure ice cold. "Officer Carter," she said, stepping toward him, "I'd like to know what exactly gave you probable cause to stop my vehicle." Carter stammered. I didn't know who you were. That's not the question I asked." Evans stepped between them. "Carter, you are hereby suspended pending an internal review, and I strongly suggest you get a lawyer." "No! This is outrageous! I was doing my job! No!" Danielle cut in, her voice slicing clean. "You were abusing your badge. And if I hadn't been who I am, you'd still think you got away with it." Carter clenched his fists. "You planned this, didn't you? You were testing us." Danielle stepped closer, her voice calm, but deadly. "I didn't have to plan anything. You exposed yourself. All I had to do was let you." Evans signaled 2 officers. "Escort him out." As Carter was dragged from the room, the weight of what had happened began to settle in. The remaining officers stood in stunned silence. Some were ashamed, some were relieved, but all of them knew something had just changed. Danielle turned to Foster. "You have a choice," she said. "Decide what kind of officer you want to be, the kind that looks away, or the kind that stands up." Foster nodded slowly. I understand." The next few days were a whirlwind. Video footage from bystanders went viral. News outlets ran with headlines like, "Top law enforcement official racially profiled in shocking traffic stop." Public outcry exploded across social media. Protesters rallied outside the Houston PD, demanding Carter's permanent removal. Inside a closed conference room, Carter sat across from Danielle, Evans, and a disciplinary panel. His file sat thick on the table. Complaints, misconduct, excessive force allegations, all ignored for years. "You have 2 choices," Evans said. "Resign quietly, or face criminal charges." Carter sneered. "You're doing this because she's got power." Danielle leaned in. "No, we're doing this because people like you think the badge gives you the right to discriminate, harass, and destroy lives. That ends today." Carter resigned, but Danielle wasn't done. Within weeks, she announced the formation of the Independent Police Oversight Commission, aimed at removing internal bias from complaint investigations. She mandated racial bias training, stricter hiring practices, and transparency in officer conduct reviews. At a packed press conference, cameras flashing, Danielle stood tall. "Today marks the first step in rebuilding public trust. Not just because of what happened to me, but because of what happens every day to people who don't have my title or my platform. I will not stop. Not until justice is not the exception, but the rule." The crowd erupted in applause. Danielle Price had turned her own injustice into a reckoning, and the system would never be the same. It had been 72 hours since Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Monroe had been ambushed on a dusty highway outside Carson, Nevada. But the pain in her ribs was still fresh, and the bruises blooming across her arms reminded her with every breath that justice in America was not blind. It was just easily bought. The world saw her as a decorated military officer, a black woman with medals and scars from 3 tours overseas. But to Officer Brett Callahan, the son of the state's most powerful senator, she was simply a black woman alone on a desert road, someone to degrade, to hurt, and to silence. The traffic stop was never about a broken taillight. It was about power, projection, and punishment. When Callahan slammed her head into the hood of his cruiser and whispered, "Bet they don't salute you now, Colonel," she didn't just feel the weight of his hands. She felt the weight of every system that allowed him to smile while doing it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that her dashcam was still rolling. But as she clutched her aching side in the concrete cell of a rural holding station, Aisha also knew that evidence alone wouldn't save her. Not here. Not when the Callahan name stretched its shadow across courtrooms, newsrooms, and even internal affairs. And especially not when the man pulling the strings behind the badge was none other than Senator Travis Callahan himself, a Southern political icon whose charm masked the rot beneath. Aisha had grown up hearing the name in living rooms and election cycles, but now she was seeing it up close. It wasn't just the son who wanted her silent. It was the father who would stop at nothing to keep the badge untouchable. They moved fast. Her phone was confiscated. Her military status pending verification. A friendly cop named Warren whispered that her injuries weren't logged, and her mugshot had already been leaked to a fringe news site, branding her a hostile federal agitator. That night, in the darkness of her cell, she heard the cell block doors open, followed by 2 sets of heavy boots. They didn't say anything at first. One of them just turned off the camera in the corner. "Orders from upstairs," the other muttered. What followed was not an interrogation. It was a warning, a punch to the gut, a knee to her already bruised ribs, a voice in the dark. "Forget what you saw. Forget who you are." But Aisha couldn't forget. Wouldn't. Even as her vision blurred and her mouth filled with blood, her mind clung to the faces of the soldiers she'd led, the communities she'd protected, and the oath she'd taken. Not to a man, not to a system, but to the truth. She was released 2 days later, bruised, shaken, and branded in the media as uncooperative. But the real war was just beginning. When she returned to Las Vegas and filed her formal complaint, she was told the evidence was missing. Her chain of command hesitated to back her. Even her attorney, a longtime civil rights advocate, warned her that going against the Callahan family meant more than just legal resistance. It meant being hunted. Within a week, Aisha's bank account was frozen pending a fraud investigation. Her VA benefits were placed on hold. A smear campaign ignited online. Doctored images, false testimonies, even a fabricated video showing her threatening officers. And when she tried to log into her email, she found her access revoked. Anonymous texts flooded her phone. Back off. Think about your family. Accidents happen. She began noticing strange cars parked near her building. One night she came home to find her door slightly ajar and all her framed medals shattered on the floor. The message was clear. She was not just fighting a crooked officer. She was up against a machine built to crush dissent. And then came the subpoena. Senator Callahan was launching a Senate committee hearing on her. Disguised as an inquiry into military radicalism, the hearing was designed to publicly shame her, to discredit her completely. Aisha knew she was walking into a trap. But she also knew if she didn't show up, the narrative would be sealed without her. So she stood tall, bruises fading but not forgotten, and walked into that grand Capitol chamber under the weight of flashing cameras and whispered condemnation. Senator Callahan sat at the head of the room, an image of Southern civility in a gray suit and polished grin. "Lieutenant Colonel Monroe," he began, "you've been accused of undermining law enforcement and inciting public unrest. Would you care to explain yourself?" Aisha met his gaze. "I didn't undermine law enforcement, Senator. I was brutalized by it. Your son violated my rights, and I have the bruises and footage to prove it." A murmur stirred in the room. Callahan's jaw twitched. "Are you accusing my son of misconduct?" "I'm accusing him of assault, unlawful arrest, and obstruction of justice." The senator smiled coolly. "And where is this so-called evidence?" "It's been leaked," she said simply. "And by now, I imagine it's made its way online." Callahan's mask cracked. Because it had. Somehow, perhaps through a civilian who recovered her dashcam backup, her footage had reached a journalist at a national media outlet. And just as she sat in that courtroom, the clip was going viral. Millions were watching. She saw it flicker across a reporter's phone screen, saw the horror dawn in the eyes of the people who once called her a liar. But Callahan wasn't done. That night, her apartment was firebombed. She escaped through the back stairwell barefoot, coughing through the smoke, clutching a go-bag she'd prepared weeks ago. The fire department never logged the incident. And the police? They claimed it was likely an electrical issue. Homeless, hunted, and without institutional protection, Aisha disappeared underground. But even in the shadows, she found unexpected allies. Black veterans who knew her story, whistleblowers who'd lost everything trying to speak truth, and a small band of journalists who refused to be silenced. Together, they gathered more evidence. Interviews. Documents. Even a former precinct tech who confessed that Callahan's patrol car camera had been wiped under direct orders from higher-ups. Bit by bit, the truth took shape. But then the Callahans launched their nuclear option, a fake video. Deepfake technology was used to fabricate a new clip, one showing Aisha drawing a weapon on officers during the traffic stop. The timing was perfect. It cast doubt just as the media tide was turning in her favor. The internet exploded. Half the country now called her a fraud. The Justice Department stalled. Sponsors of her legal fund pulled out. And even her own family, fearing for their safety, begged her to give up. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. The death threats increased. One night, someone mailed her a military dog tag soaked in red ink. Her hands shook as she held it. But still, she did not quit. Instead, she went to the one place where she still had leverage, the court of public opinion. She appeared on national television, raw and unapologetic. "I fought for this country, I bled for this country, and now this country wants to erase me. But I'm not going anywhere. Because if they can do this to me, imagine what they're doing to people without my rank or platform." Her voice broke. But she didn't stop. The next morning, several new whistleblowers came forward. One revealed that Senator Callahan had been diverting state funds to private security firms used to intimidate dissenters. Another had emails that showed Callahan personally ordering the cover-up of his son's arrest record, which included past complaints from other black drivers. The case shifted. The FBI, under mounting public pressure, opened an official investigation. Months later, a new hearing was called. This time, Aisha sat across from Senator Callahan, not as a witness, but as a plaintiff. Her evidence was airtight. The fake video was debunked by digital forensics. Victims previously silenced by fear stepped into the light. The tide turned. The man once thought untouchable was now facing ethics violations, criminal conspiracy charges, and a recommendation for expulsion from the Senate. And yet, even with victory within reach, Aisha felt no joy. Because the scars hadn't healed. Because justice had come too late for too many. Because every step she took had been through fire. But she also knew something else. She had survived. And her story had ignited a movement. Across the nation, veterans and citizens rallied behind her. Reform bills were introduced in multiple states. Dashcam footage regulations were tightened. Deepfake legislation gained traction. And most importantly, those in power were now being watched by a public that refused to look away. Standing at the Lincoln Memorial months later, Aisha delivered the keynote speech for the March for Truth. "I am not a hero," she said, voice steady in the wind. "I am a warning to those who wear power like a crown, not a responsibility. To those who think their legacy can bury our lives, to those who believe a uniform gives them permission to dehumanize. We are watching, we are rising, and we will not be silenced." The crowd roared, and somewhere, in a quiet office, with walls lined with flags and faces of fallen soldiers, her name was finally added to the honor roll, not for dying in battle, but for surviving a war that was never declared but always raging. Cassandra Hill stood alone in her apartment at 2:43 a.m., staring at her cracked phone screen, the video looping over and over again. It wasn't the original footage, the one that had gone viral and forced Officer Carter into resignation, the one that vindicated her after he racially profiled and illegally arrested her in broad daylight. No, this was a doctored video, a new grotesque version of the truth, surgically altered using cutting-edge deepfake technology. In this version, she looked aggressive. Her voice was raised, her movements threatening, her face twisted into something it never was. This was not Cassandra Hill. But to the world, it looked like her. And suddenly, the woman who had stood for justice just weeks ago was now being painted as the aggressor, the liar, the threat. Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum. Her breathing became shallow. The digital dagger had been planted, and it was spreading faster than wildfire across every platform imaginable. #FraudHill was trending. And the worst part? It was working. The comments below the video were crueler than anything she had seen before. "Typical thug in disguise. She tricked everyone. Power-hungry black witch." The words clawed at her soul. Cassandra dropped the phone onto the couch and pressed her back to the wall, sliding down until her knees were to her chest. Her fingers trembled. Her breath caught in her throat. Not because she was afraid of the lies, but because she knew what lies like this did to people. They didn't just destroy reputations, they erased entire legacies. She had fought so hard to rise through a system built to keep people like her out. And now, a weaponized lie was being used to drag her back down into silence. It had only been 3 months since she stood in front of the state capitol, announcing the launch of the Independent Police Oversight Commission. People had called her a warrior for justice. Children had looked up to her. Survivors of police brutality had written her letters of thanks. That speech, that moment, it had been the apex of a lifetime spent proving herself over and over again. But now, her inbox was full of death threats. Her office had received over 200 formal complaints. Most of them spammed copies of the same AI-generated message accusing her of corruption. A fake email address with her name on it had been circulating, filled with hateful messages to public officials, none of which she had ever sent. Her world was unraveling pixel by pixel, post by post, algorithm by algorithm. She knew who was behind it. Maybe not the exact names, but the power, the network, the desperation of men like Senator Travis Callahan. The same one whose campaign had been publicly humiliated when Cassandra exposed Officer Carter, one of his hand-picked enforcers. They had watched her rise, and now they were hell-bent on her fall. Because Cassandra hadn't just removed a corrupt cop, she had cracked open the first brick in the wall that protected all the others. And now, the wall was striking back. The call for transparency, oversight, and racial bias training had terrified them. They didn't need bullets to kill her mission. They only needed doubt. But Cassandra wasn't the type to break. Not fully. Not forever. Through the panic, the grief, the exhaustion that haunted every breath, she slowly stood. Her legs wobbled, but her spirit pushed forward. She turned toward her desk and opened her laptop, opening a video conferencing app. She called her communications team, many of whom hadn't slept in 2 days. "We go public," she said, her voice low but steady. "Tonight." One of her assistants protested. "Director Hill, it's risky. If we rush it..." "They want me to be afraid," she interrupted. "They want silence. I will not give it to them." An hour later, Cassandra sat beneath a single ring light in her living room, her eyes tired, her voice heavy with hurt, but her presence unshaken. The live stream began. Thousands logged on. Tens of thousands. By the minute, it multiplied. "Tonight," she began, "I'm not speaking to you as the director of law enforcement. I'm speaking to you as a woman who has been lied about, slandered, and attacked, not because I did something wrong, but because I did something right." Her voice wavered, just once, when she spoke of the death threats. The messages sent to her mother's house. The photos of her 10-year-old niece used in memes by hate groups. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "This isn't just about me anymore," she said. "It's about every truth-teller who's ever been digitally assassinated for standing up to power." She played the fake video, then the real one. Then she brought on a forensic analyst who explained, frame by frame, how the forgery had been crafted. She exposed the metadata, the source accounts, the bots used to circulate it. She laid it all bare, laid it all, not to beg for sympathy, but to declare war on the machinery of deception. And then she made her final plea. "If you've ever believed in truth, in fairness, in justice, I need you now, not just for me, but for every woman, every person of color, every activist who speaks out and is nearly drowned by lies designed to break them. Like this video. Share it. Speak the truth. Because they can only win if we give up. And I am not giving up." The video was watched by millions. The hashtag changed. Stand with Hill replaced the smear campaign within 48 hours. But the damage still ran deep. The Attorney General ordered a cybercrime task force to investigate the deepfake's origins, but progress was slow. Cassandra's home remained under surveillance. She had to travel with security. Her family relocated temporarily for safety. She received anonymous packages filled with pig's blood, notes that said, "Shut up or be shut down." It was warfare, digital, psychological, cultural, and still, she went to work. Day after day, Cassandra walked into her office knowing a portion of the public still doubted her. Knowing she had been re-victimized by a system built to crush the credibility of Black women in power. Knowing every interview, every press briefing, every post could be twisted. Her heart bore the weight of 1,000 wounds, but her resolve had never been clearer. One morning, she stood in front of her team and pointed to a new initiative. "We're building a digital truth lab," she announced, "to train every department in the state to detect deepfakes, protect public officials from digital framing, and educate the public on misinformation warfare." Someone asked, "What should we call it?" She looked at the wall where a news article was pinned with the headline, "Director Hill attacked by deepfake smear campaign." She smiled. "Call it Project Phoenix, because they thought they burned me down, but I'm rising." And weeks later, at a tech summit hosted in Austin, Cassandra delivered the keynote. This time, she stood tall, not just as a law enforcement leader, but as a survivor of the most advanced smear campaign ever used against a public official in her state. "When you live in truth," she said, "you become a target. But when truth lives in you, no lie can hold you forever." The room gave her a standing ovation. And still, she went back to work. Because Cassandra Hill didn't fight for applause. She fought so no one else would have to go through what she had. So the next black woman who stood up against a rogue officer wouldn't have to survive a digital crucifixion. So the next whistleblower wouldn't be gaslit by AI-generated lies. So truth would have a defender, not just in the courtroom, but in the code. And she wasn't done yet. If you believe in truth, justice, and fighting back against the powerful who try to silence voices like Cassandra's, please click like to show your support. Subscribe to our channel to follow her incredible story and many others like it. Cassandra Hill didn't break. She rose. And with your voice, we can make sure they don't win. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another story of resilience. You won't want to miss it. They didn't know how she got it. They didn't know who leaked it, or how she got past the encrypted firewalls buried behind multiple state servers. But what Cassandra Hill had in her possession that rainy Tuesday evening inside her dimly lit office in downtown Austin, sealed behind the thick steel door of her personal safe, was enough to turn the entire Texas law enforcement system upside down. Not a video, not a witness statement, not another piece of fake footage to spin or dismiss. No, what Cassandra had was something bigger, more dangerous, and far more damning than anyone could have imagined. A digital ledger, classified, compartmentalized, documenting backdoor payments, encrypted messages, rigged complaint review processes, altered evidence logs, and the names of more than 30 senior law enforcement officials, judges, and politicians who had systematically buried hundreds of cases of brutality, racial targeting, and abuse for over 12 years. And at the top of that list, a name no one ever dared whisper out loud: Texas Governor Malcolm Stroud. Cassandra's hands shook as she stared at the document on her encrypted laptop screen. Rows upon rows of digital rot, connected like arteries feeding a single monstrous heart, the criminal justice system itself. She knew she had uncovered the nerve center of everything she had fought against, from Officer Carter's racially charged roadside assault on her, to the deepfake video created to destroy her credibility, to the sudden deaths and disappearances of whistleblowers before her. This wasn't corruption. This was a syndicate. And now, Cassandra wasn't just a director trying to reform the system. She was a marked threat to its survival. She should have backed away, shut the laptop, burned it all, but she didn't. Because something inside her, a relentless voice that had carried her through the bruises, the humiliation, the lies, and the character assassination, told her this was why she survived. She was meant to see this, to fight this, even if it meant risking everything. But what she did next, no one saw coming. Instead of going to the FBI, the Attorney General's office, or even trusted allies in Washington, Cassandra vanished. No press, no statement, no meetings, just silence. Her team panicked. Her assistant Nina was the last to see her, quietly slipping out the back of the building in a black hoodie and jeans, her state-issued badge left on the desk next to a hand-scribbled note. Don't trust anyone. For 6 days, Cassandra disappeared from the grid. She turned off all devices, ditched her car, and used a burner phone she'd hidden years ago, just in case. She slept in safe houses known only to a few retired civil rights veterans who owed her father favors. But during those 6 days, she didn't rest. She traveled across Texas, meeting with hidden allies, an ex-forensic analyst with terminal cancer who had documents locked in a safety deposit box, a hacker known only as Coal Dust, who had intercepted secure transmissions between the governor's office and a now-deceased sheriff in East Texas, and a whistleblower named Matthew Clay, who'd faked his own death after discovering internal police reports had been fabricated to protect officers involved in the killing of a 14-year-old unarmed black teen. Cassandra collected everything. Layer by layer, piece by piece, she built a case so bulletproof it terrified even her. And yet she still didn't know how to release it. The courts were compromised. The media, half-owned by donors named in the ledger. She needed a new way, a way no one expected. On the 7th day, Cassandra reappeared. Not at a press conference, not on television, but on a live stream posted anonymously to a forgotten underground server once used by digital activists. The screen was dark at first. Then a single image appeared. Cassandra Hill. Face weary but unwavering, seated at a table in a room with no windows. "What I'm about to show you," she said, "will change everything." She pressed a button and the screen cut to black. Then, documents, footage, names, bank accounts, unredacted files, audio recordings of conversations between state officials laughing about neutralizing protest leaders, a copy of a report titled Suppression Strategy, Phase 3, which included methods to plant drugs, falsify mental health evaluations, and deepfake arrest videos targeting critics of the state. A list of journalists and attorneys flagged for containment. And at the center of it all? An executive signature that read, Malcolm Stroud, for official use only. The leak was nuclear. Within minutes, thousands of people were watching. Then hundreds of thousands. Then millions. Cassandra's voice, low and measured, guided viewers through every horrifying detail, connecting dots no one had dared connect before. She explained how police complaints were routed through a software filter designed to deprioritize reports filed by minorities, how body camera footage was regularly purged through a loophole exploited by code written by a private contractor whose CEO donated millions to the governor's re-election campaign, how whistleblower protection laws were intentionally left unenforced in the state's southern counties, and how she, Cassandra Hill, had nearly been destroyed, physically, mentally, digitally, for getting too close. She ended the stream with a single statement. "I don't expect to be safe after this, but if anything happens to me, you'll know exactly why. My name is Cassandra Hill, and this is not just my fight anymore. It's yours." The screen went black. The comments exploded. The world was on fire. Within hours, Governor Stroud issued a denial. Baseless, hacked, deep-faked. But it was too late. The documents had been mirrored across hundreds of servers. Anonymous whistleblowers backed up Cassandra's claims. A state judge filed an emergency motion to freeze official channels for evidence destruction. Protesters filled the streets of Austin, Houston, and Dallas, chanting her name. Reporters demanded answers, Senators called for an emergency ethics committee. Federal investigators launched a probe. But Cassandra? She vanished again. Because she had done the unthinkable, not just revealing the truth, but exposing how big the truth really was. Some believed she was in hiding, waiting to see how things played out. Others believed she had gone into protective custody with the U.S. Marshals. Rumors swirled. Some claimed she'd been taken out quietly. Others swore they saw her boarding a private plane under a false name. The mystery only made the public clamor louder. Where is Cassandra Hill? But more importantly, what will she do next? Then, 12 days after the leak, a letter appeared on Cassandra's verified social media page, typed. Signed, one paragraph. I knew what I was doing. I knew it would cost me. But I didn't come this far to flinch. The people who profit from injustice count on our fear. I chose truth. Now I ask you, what will you choose, CH? The comments section erupted. Tens of thousands of replies poured in, from civil rights lawyers, mothers of slain children, retired officers who'd tried and failed to reform their departments. Ordinary people who had once doubted Cassandra, but now saw her as a warrior, a symbol, a spark. The intrigue of her disappearance only deepened her legend. But it was the risk, the unbelievable courage, that changed everything. She had gone against the entire state, the entire system, with nothing but evidence, conviction, and a willingness to walk into darkness with her head high. And still, her story wasn't over. A federal grand jury was now hearing evidence linked to her findings. Investigations spread to other states. Her oversight commission, temporarily frozen, was revived under emergency public order, and activists began organizing under a new movement, the Cassandra Protocol, a grassroots call for digital transparency, real-time accountability, and protection for whistleblowers like her. Somewhere out there, Cassandra Hill was watching. And waiting. Because she had more. There were files she hadn't released. Voices she'd recorded. Allies buried deep inside the machine who had promised to keep the next wave coming. This wasn't just a one-time data dump. It was a slow burn, timed like clockwork, designed not to take down one man, but the very culture that protected men like him. What did she risk? Everything. Her job, her safety, her future. But what did she gain? A nation finally forced to reckon with itself. For 39 hours, no one in the state of Texas knew where Cassandra Hill had gone. 1 minute, she was behind her polished desk at the Texas Department of Law Enforcement, poised as ever, delivering a quiet but powerful statement about the progress of police reform. The next, she was gone. No meetings, no emails, no calls. Her phone was powered down, her SUV was left in the agency garage. Her badge and ID were sitting on her desk as if she had simply evaporated. The city buzzed with questions. Was she kidnapped? Had someone silenced her? Was it all too much? But the truth, when it finally came, was far stranger, more thrilling, and infinitely more dangerous than anyone could have imagined, because Cassandra Hill hadn't disappeared. She had gone underground, by choice, and what she did during those missing 39 hours would change the future of law enforcement forever. It all started with a slip of paper, folded twice, tucked inside a book she found on her office shelf. A memoir written by a long-deceased civil rights judge she admired. She had read it a dozen times. But that day, that moment, something felt different. She opened it and saw a handwritten note in ink, barely legible. If you're reading this, it means you've come too close. Go to the place where justice drowned in silence. Bring no one. Trust no one. There was no signature, no explanation. Just an address and a date. March 4th, tomorrow. Her heart thudded. Her breath slowed. She stared at the message for a long time, the room spinning, the weight of what it might mean pressing against her chest. Cassandra didn't tell her staff, didn't contact authorities. Instead, she packed a small bag with plain clothes, burner phones, and a flash drive locked in a metal case, the one she had sworn never to open unless she felt her life or her mission were truly in danger. Then she vanished. The address led her to a town not listed on any modern GPS, an abandoned settlement on the border of East Texas, long forgotten by the state, covered in vines and dust and whispers. She parked at the edge of a collapsed general store, the silence so thick it choked her. Then she saw it. An old church, half buried in brush, its door still standing. She entered. The room smelled of mildew and memories. Stained glass flickered with dying sunlight. At the altar, someone waited. A man in his 70s, skin leathered by time and truth, eyes sharp with knowing. "You Cassandra?" he asked without turning. "Thought you might come." "Who are you?" she asked, her hand hovering near her phone. "Someone who knows how deep the rot goes. Someone who lost too much to it." He handed her a file. "What's in there? They'll kill for it." Inside were names, videos, bank records, contracts. It was the missing puzzle piece, the thing she didn't even know she needed. It wasn't just a corruption scandal. It was a program. A shadow network operated by law enforcement and private security firms under the guise of community stability. Codename: Project Silence. It monitored activists, suppressed complaints, falsified case outcomes. Judges were bribed. Officers promoted for brutality. Whistleblowers disappeared. And the kicker? The whole thing was protected by state-level encryption. "You can't leak it," the man said. "You have to expose it. Publicly, in a way they can't spin." "How?" she whispered. And what he told her next was the beginning of one of the most unbelievable adventures ever undertaken by a public official in modern history. Over the next 24 hours, Cassandra traveled through 4 counties, using back roads and safe houses, meeting with 3 people whose names were only known to the deepest corners of the civil rights movement: survivors, ex-technicians, a reformed black hat hacker named Moth, who once designed surveillance tools for private contractors and now lived off-grid in an underground bunker powered by solar panels and guilt. Moth was the key. "This program isn't just illegal," they told Cassandra, sliding a keyboard her way. "It's untouchable. They built it with a fail-safe. If anyone tries to leak it, digitally or physically, it self-wipes. But if you access it from the inside and expose it live, in real time, it can't be stopped. Because once it's seen, it's permanent." "Where's the access point?" she asked. Moth looked at her, hesitant, then pointed to a map. "The governor's mansion." Her breath stopped. "That's suicide." Not if you do it right. Not if you already know they're watching you. Let them. Use it." What followed was like something out of a political thriller. But every second was real. Cassandra disguised herself in a maintenance uniform and used her access clearance from a prior meeting to enter the mansion's west wing, posing as part of a cleaning crew. She carried nothing but a mop bucket and a tiny, customized thumb drive hidden in the heel of her shoe. one that Moth had programmed to access the main server and broadcast the data through dozens of mirror sites. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Her steps echoed like gunshots. Her palms were slick with sweat. When she reached the security hallway, she found the access terminal, unguarded. She plugged in the drive. It began to upload. 20 seconds, 30, 50. Then an alarm. They knew. Footsteps thundered down the hallway, but Cassandra didn't run. She stood there, eyes locked on the screen, the data spilling into the light, blasting across dark corners of the web, into public archives, onto anonymous forums, through every node Moth had set. By the time they grabbed her, the truth had already escaped. She was dragged into a black car, blindfolded, taken to a private holding site hours outside Austin. She was interrogated, deprived of sleep, asked who else was involved. She didn't answer. Not once. She just repeated, "The people have it now." 3 days later, after mounting public pressure and intervention from federal watchdogs, Cassandra was released. But the damage, to the system, was done. The files had gone viral. Project Silence was real. Every part of it. And the people, once passive, were enraged. Protests erupted across the state. Demands for accountability flooded the Capitol. Lawmakers denied knowledge, but Cassandra had already provided names, emails, receipts. The governor tried to distance himself, but a recovered voice memo revealed him saying, "Let Hill hang. She's one woman. The system survives." Not this time. Cassandra returned to the public stage to roaring crowds and broken chains. She didn't stand behind a podium. She stood in the street, surrounded by survivors, holding the same folder that had started it all. "I didn't go rogue," she said. "I went righteous." In the weeks that followed, 27 resignations, 5 indictments, a full federal probe. But the most powerful thing? A belief reborn. People began to speak again, to hope, to believe that one voice, one woman, could rip a hole in a fortress of lies. And yet, even now, no one knows how Cassandra found that original file, or who left the note, or why she risked her life instead of just leaking it to the press. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was justice. Maybe it was a secret she still holds for the next chapter of the fight. But one thing is certain. Cassandra Hill didn't just fight the system. She rewrote the rules. Cassandra Hill stepped onto the stage that afternoon not as a symbol, not as the director of reform, or Texas's justice warrior, or the woman who exposed the system, but as herself, in full. The sun dipped gently behind the clouds above the Capitol steps, and a breeze brushed against her navy blazer as the crowd quieted to an expectant hush. This wasn't a press conference. There were no government officials behind her, no polished PR team managing her words. It was just her. One microphone, a sky full of questions, and thousands of hearts ready to hear the truth. Most of them didn't know what she had been through. Not really. They had read headlines, seen photos, and heard phrases like deepfake scandal, wrongful arrest, and systemic overhaul. But today they would know the story behind those words. Today, she was going to tell them what it really cost to change a system that didn't want to be changed. Her voice cracked on the first sentence, and no one judged her. "I've never told the full story," she began, her fingers trembling slightly around the mic. "I've never said what really happened, because if I had, some of you would have thought it was too much to be true, or too painful to be worth hearing. But they listened. All of them. Even the wind seemed to pause as she took a breath and looked out over the crowd. Students holding protest signs, mothers clutching photos of lost sons, elders in folding chairs with tear-streaked cheeks. These were the people she had fought for when she was thrown against her car, handcuffed, and humiliated on the side of the road by Officer Carter. But that day, on that street, no one had known she was the director of law enforcement. They didn't see her titles or degrees or medals. They saw a black woman in a nice car, and that was enough for the system to treat her like a threat. "That traffic stop didn't just bruise my wrists," she said, voice steadying. "It broke something inside me, something I didn't even know could break." The silence was heavy. I remember thinking, as I sat in the back of that police car, if this can happen to me, what's happening to people who don't have a title, who don't have a platform, who don't have a voice? What they hadn't known, until now, was that after Carter's arrest, things didn't get easier. They got worse. The system struck back in quiet, brutal ways. Cassandra revealed how her emails had been hacked, how edited footage had circulated online to frame her as violent and unstable, how she received threats at home, and how someone had followed her niece home from school to send a message. "They told me to drop the investigation," she said. "They told me I was making the department look bad. They said I was dividing the force." But the truth is, the force was already divided between those who served with honor and those who served themselves. Yet her hands tightened around the podium. The crowd didn't move. She told them about the night someone sent her a letter filled with ashes and a single sentence, "Turn to dust or be turned." She read it while sitting alone in her kitchen, tears rolling down her cheeks, wondering if it was all worth it. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the dark with a photo of her late father, who had marched with John Lewis, had once been jailed for sitting at a whites-only lunch counter, and had told her on his deathbed, "The price of progress, baby girl, is pain, but it's the only currency they can't steal from you." Her voice broke. She wiped her cheek. "I didn't tell anyone," she admitted. "Not my team, not my family. I didn't want them to worry. I just carried it, alone." And then came the reveal, the part that made the crowd gasp, the moment when the full truth hit like a wave. "There was a night," she whispered, "when I almost resigned." Gasps. Whispers. I had the letter typed out. I was ready to walk away, because I couldn't take the lies, the threats, the surveillance, the fear, but something stopped me. A little boy, 7 years old, who came up to me during a community event and said, "My mommy says you're not afraid of police. I want to be like you." The crowd was silent again. Utterly still. That little boy saved me. He'll never know it. But he did. Her voice softened. I kept going. She told them how she formed the Independent Police Oversight Commission in spite of opposition from every angle, how she demanded racial bias training, revamped hiring protocols, and personally investigated complaints the department had buried for years. She told them how many nights she'd wept into a pillow, how many times her own officers whispered insults behind her back, how many powerful men in suits told her she was being too emotional. But it was never emotion, she said. It was pain. It was truth. And they hate truth when it comes from a woman who looks like me. At this, the crowd erupted in applause, brief, passionate, and full of fire. Then she told them how she survived the smear campaign, how a deepfake video nearly ruined everything, how even her closest allies doubted her for a moment, how her inbox became a hellscape of hate, and how one night she found a bullet casing on her porch. But I didn't stop, she said, because I knew that if I did, they'd win. And if I kept going, even if I failed, maybe someone else would know it could be done. The wind picked up again, picked up. Flags flapped in rhythm with the pounding of hearts. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then she told them what they had come to hear. 3 months ago, we launched an anonymous platform for victims of racial profiling. Last week, we received our 10,000th complaint. And now, because of your voices, your protests, your relentless support, 29 officers across Texas have been suspended pending investigation. 17 are being charged. 18 are. And today, the governor signed our reform bill into law. The cheers roared across the Capitol lawn. People cried. People shouted. People fell into each other's arms, overwhelmed by the moment. But Cassandra wasn't finished. She raised one hand, and the crowd fell silent again. "But let me tell you what I'm most proud of," she said softly. "It's not the headlines, not the applause, it's not even the bill." She paused. "It's that I didn't break." The crowd stood in awe. "I bent, I bruised, I bled, but I didn't break. And I won't because we're just getting started." Tears streamed down cheeks across the crowd, not just because of what she had endured, but because they felt it. They saw themselves in her pain, in her perseverance, in her unwillingness to give up when it would have been easier to walk away. And as Cassandra stepped back from the podium, the applause didn't stop. It rose, like thunder, like a promise, like a wave of gratitude that crashed over her and reminded her she was never truly alone, not in her pain, not in her purpose. The storm had passed. The truth had been told. And for the first time, in a very long time, Cassandra Hill stood beneath the wide Texas sky without the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing against her spine. She stood on the steps of the newly renovated Texas State Law Enforcement Headquarters, a building that once symbolized silence, fear, and bureaucracy. Today, it stood for something else, for accountability, for justice, for change. She took a breath, long and steady, as the afternoon sun bathed her face. The crowd before her was not as massive as the protests that had followed her wrongful arrest, or the eruption after the deepfake scandal, or the whistleblower hearings she had bravely spearheaded. But it was just as powerful. Because this crowd was different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid. It was hopeful. Cassandra smiled, not the camera-ready, press-polished smile of a public official, but a real one, the kind of smile that comes after surviving something meant to break you. And in her case, it had been many things. The racist officer who arrested her without cause, the false media narratives, the character assassinations, the synthetic lies constructed to erase her voice, the surveillance, the threats, the long nights alone in her apartment, staring into the dark, wondering if she'd gone too far, or not far enough. But she hadn't broken. She had risen. And today, she stood not just as the director of law enforcement, but as a woman who had dared to believe the system could be rebuilt from the inside out. And made it happen. She looked into the crowd and saw them. The students, the activists, the mothers of victims, the retired officers who had joined her cause, the tech experts who had exposed the deepfake network, the citizens who once doubted her but now showed up every time she spoke. And in the front row, she saw the little boy who once told her, "My mommy says you're not afraid of police. I want to be like you." He wore a shirt that said, "Truth is power." She blinked back tears. Taking the microphone, Cassandra began her final speech. Not as a warrior, but as a teacher. "I want to end this chapter of my journey with honesty," she said. "Because that's how we build trust. That's how we heal. That's how we move forward." Her voice was warm, steady, but heavy with emotion. "I didn't set out to be a hero. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to do my job. But what I learned is that sometimes doing your job, honestly, is enough to make you a target." The crowd nodded, silent, drawn in. "But I also learned something else," she said. "I learned that courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's choosing to speak when your voice shakes. It's walking into a room full of enemies and refusing to lower your head. It's standing your ground when the truth you carry makes other people uncomfortable." She paused, letting those words settle into the hearts around her. "And I want to be clear about something. I didn't win because I was stronger. I didn't win because I had power. I won because I had support. Because people like you refused to let me stand alone." There was applause, soft at first, then building. She smiled again. "When I was sitting in the back of that police car, wrongfully arrested, humiliated, profiled because of my skin, my gender, and my success, I could have stayed quiet. I could have let it slide. But silence would have made me a prisoner, not just to Officer Carter, but to every system that enabled him." There were murmurs of agreement. Some people wiped tears from their cheeks. "I kept going," she said. "Even when they tried to destroy me with fake videos, doctored messages, AI-generated lies. Even when I found bullets on my porch and cameras in my trees. I kept going, because if I didn't, then everything they did to me would be justified." She looked down for a moment, then back up again, her voice soft but strong. "I want to tell you what the real victory is," she said. "It's not just that we passed legislation. It's not that we launched the Oversight Commission. It's not even that corrupt officers have been held accountable. The real victory is this moment, where you're still here, where the truth won. People cheered, loud, heartfelt. A woman in the back shouted, 'We love you, Cassandra!' She chuckled. Then she offered a final message, one that wasn't just about her, but about everyone who had ever faced injustice. If you take nothing else from my story, let it be this. Never underestimate the power of standing up when it's easier to sit down. Never believe that your voice is too small, or your truth too inconvenient. Never let fear of failure silence the fire inside you." She raised her hand toward the sky. "Because this fight isn't over. This story isn't finished. I'm just one person, but you are many. And together, you are unstoppable." The crowd stood, applauding, some crying, some clapping in rhythm, others simply holding each other in quiet recognition of the truth they had just heard. Then she stepped back, and the mic was turned off, and the world felt just a little more awake. Cassandra didn't run for Congress. She didn't write a book. She didn't sign a movie deal. She went back to her office, rolled up her sleeves, and kept working, investigating abuse, mentoring new officers, expanding the commission, listening to victims, defending those without platforms. Quietly, relentlessly, honestly. Because for Cassandra Hill, justice wasn't a moment. It was a mission. And her story, like so many stories, wasn't about being perfect. It was about being persistent. What can we take from Cassandra's story? That change is never easy, that telling the truth costs something, that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you act despite the fear. Cassandra's journey reminds us that integrity will always outlast the lies, even when the system tries to rewrite reality. It teaches us that no title, no badge, no level of success protects you from injustice, but it can give you the tools to fight it. And most importantly, it shows us that we are all responsible for the kind of justice we want to live under. If Cassandra's story touched your heart, please leave a comment to encourage her and the countless others who fight injustice every day. Click like to show your support for her courage, her honesty, and her relentless pursuit of justice. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Tomorrow's story will inspire you in a whole new way. You won't want to miss it.